Hello, Fiveable students. Welcome to tonight's live stream. We're looking at the Indian Ocean Exchange tonight. I'm your host, Mr. Lassiter, here with you to guide you from place to place across the Indian Ocean. We're going to be talking about a lot of things tonight, hopefully trying to answer all of your questions. Along the way, we're going to look at some good primary sources, or at least sources that I think are pretty great. Thinking about trade in the Indian Ocean and some of the unique aspects of trade in this dominant trade network. And we'll talk about just how dominant it is as we go through tonight's presentation. So a couple things that I just want to get started with you. Again, if you want to engage with any AP World History chatter, you can find me on Twitter at Wapters. Of course, a lot of us in the Fiveable community are on there. So get involved, retweet, of course, like, subscribe, whatever else you children do. But looking forward to kind of expanding the conversation beyond this one stream. The topic for tonight is exchange in the Indian Ocean. But if it's not enough for you and you want more information, certainly we can provide it for you even later this evening. So a couple things. Remember to follow Think Fiveable on Instagram, which has like a much funnier Instagram than I ever will. Make sure like us on Twitter and Instagram, whatever you do on those things. Everyone has a different name. But what we want to do tonight, of course, here is talk about the Indian Ocean, exchange in the Indian Ocean, trade in this network. But if you are just itching to keep sailing, and perhaps maybe you're over there on the far west coast, we're going to have another presentation night from Allie Thiessen at 11:30 p.m. Eastern. I know that's pretty late for a lot of us, but 8:30 over there on the Pacific side of things is a perfect time tonight. If you know any of your friends over there taking AP World on the other side of the country from where I am here in North Carolina, send them a message, send them a tweet, send them a text, let them know that's going on tonight. And as Eric Beckman has put in the chat, you can go and reserve that spot. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But that's tonight, October 1st. Welcome to October. It's 95 degrees in North Carolina. Then if you later this week on the 4th, we have some skills work that you can get in with Sophia. On the 4th, that's 6 p.m. Eastern, textbook reading and notes. And for some of you, you may be thinking, oh, it's too late already. No, it is never too late to get some good tips on how to use your textbook. The College Board certainly makes that a part of the class. It is certainly kind of the college experience of AP World History. But there's a lot of really great strategies for attacking that and taking good notes that will help you come test time. On the 5th, we have the Mongols coming up, guys. This might be the highlight of the fall semester here. So Mongols, trade, all my favorite things happening this week. That's at 6 p.m. on the 5th. And then a live student study group coming up on the 6th. So definitely join in those offerings. Remember that you can participate in those. And then you can also watch replays if you are a member of Fiveable. So let's get moving, or keep moving with this, and talk about what are we going to do now? What are we going to do over the next 54 minutes plus whatever time Mr. Lassiter goes over, because I do that sometimes. Well, the first thing we're going to talk about are just the basics of the Indian Ocean, the basics of this basin, this large body of water that serves as the center of trade for, well, thousands of years now. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The next thing we'll do is talk about why Indian Ocean trade grows so much in this early time period of of AP world history between 1200 and 1450. And that growth started way before, but in the post-classical era, around the year 600s, picked up steam definitely in the 7th, 8th, 9th centuries. And by the time you get to about 1200 to 1450, trade in the Indian Ocean is moving, it's grooving. So we're going to talk about what the causes of that were, and some aspects that encourage trade to expand. And then, of course, we'll look at the effects of that growth of Indian Ocean trade. What does that mean for trading cities and states? And most importantly, probably, what does that mean for cultural developments and interactions in these regions? Though it's hard to say one is more important than the other, depending on what your teacher may emphasize. So looking forward to having you as you arrive, as you get in the chat. Feel free to talk with each other. Feel free to tell people where you're from, make new friends, and certainly ask your questions tonight as we look at the Indian Ocean. The first thing we're going to start with, though, is a little source. And I say little, but I want to take a look at this source that was shared with me by Mr. Beckman, of course. And this source really highlights just how, well, two things mainly: how unique the Indian Ocean is in some aspects, but also how long trade has been happening in this region. So this is from a Greco-Egyptian merchant of the 1st century. We don't know exactly who it was, but this is their travel report, the Periplus Maris Erythraeae. I think I'm close enough with that pronunciation, although I'm very rusty on my ancient Greek. The whole voyage, as above described, from Cana and Eudaemon, Arabia, they used to make in small vessels, sailing close around the shores of gulfs. And Hippolus was the pilot who, by observing the location of the ports and the conditions of the sea, first discovered how to lay his course straight across the ocean. For at the same time, when with us the Etesian winds are blowing on the shores of India, the wind sets in from the ocean, and this southwest wind is called Hippolus, from the name of him who first discovered the passage across. From that time to the present day, ships start, some direct from Cana, some from the Cape of Spices, and those bound for Limriki, which is just a name for a region in India. I had to look that one up, guys. They throw the ship's head considerably off the wind, while those bound for Scythia and Baragaza keep along the shore not more than 3 days. And for the rest of the time, hold the same course straight out to sea. All right, what is all this? First of all, there's a lot of things that are tough to pronounce there. Sorry about that, guys. My fault. But it's talking about these Etesian winds. So, we got to think, well, what is he referencing here? Well, there's a few things that we can grab from this source. One, these winds that he talks about. This merchant is discussing how people used to sail along the coasts very slowly, staying close to the land to get from place to place. But now they have learned to lay course straight across the ocean, going over the deep waters, in this case of the Indian Ocean. And what we're seeing there is a unique set of wind patterns that are enabling people to travel back and forth safely across the Indian Ocean, which we tend to think we call today the monsoon winds, wind currents. That is going to be a very unique feature of the Indian Ocean, a very predictable feature of the Indian Ocean, and one that is going to make the region surrounding the Indian Ocean basin very unique in and of itself. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. Another thing you can see here, just how many regions it's talking about trading in this Indian Ocean, right? Ports on the north shore of the Arabian Sea, talking about the Cape of Spices, talking about regions in India, right? All of these regions coming together to trade in the Indian Ocean, and it expands mightily in this time period. So we're going to think about this. Again, this is from the 1st century CE, although we're spending most of our time now in the 13th through 15th for the rest of this. So let's keep thinking about that and consider, well, just what he's describing with some basics of the Indian Ocean. First and foremost, let's just talk about the geography here of the Indian Ocean. You have this great map that Wikipedia and Wikimedia Commons has provided for us, showing the extent of the Indian Ocean. It is the ocean that is bordered by Africa to the west, Arabia in the northwest, Iran or Persia in the north, along with India to the north, and to the northeast by Southeast Asia, by the regions of the Malay Peninsula and Indonesia. So, and then of course to the east or southeast by Australia. Sorry, we're not going to talk about them much today. Yeah, that happens. So a couple things to think about with the geography is that this is a very navigable ocean, right? When the Europeans started sailing in the Indian Ocean, they actually had some difficulty and had to adapt their ships to the rough seas of the Indian Ocean. Of course, the Pacific is vast. It is very hard to cross those Polynesian migrations into the Pacific Ocean, where people move from island to island, kind of hopping from one to the other, is kind of the exception. Nobody was really traversing the Pacific Ocean. But the Indian Ocean is very different. It is navigable, and as people learn to navigate this ocean, not just hugging the coastlines to move from place to place, they learn to go out into the ocean and use what is probably the most unique feature. That is the learning about the environmental conditions, the monsoon winds or the monsoon seasons. Have the wrong picture there. So the Indian Ocean and trade in it is very closely tied to these winds. And basically what you get are winds that roughly from the Asian continent blow out in one portion of the year and blow in another portion of the year. And those winds are quite predictable based on the season. And it escapes me right now which season they go which way, but that's not terribly important at the moment. But they allow for seasonal travel. So people would plan their long ocean voyages and their trade around these monsoon winds. Now, what that meant was once you have sailed to, let's say, another region of the Indian Ocean, let's say you sail from India to the coast of Africa to trade your wares, you have to wait a little while for those winds to shift, right? They're seasonable winds. And so this brings us to another unique feature of trade in the Indian Ocean, which is that all around this Indian Ocean basin, and what I mean by that basin is this region around this ocean, right? The ocean itself is a basin. It just happens to be filled with water. So all of these regions around the Indian Ocean basin, trade cities will open up or will grow, but they will be very diverse. We often use the term cosmopolitan to describe these trade cities that dot the rim of the Indian Ocean. And so these cosmopolitan cities develop where you have people of many different backgrounds, cultures, religions, languages, people who hold very different ideas, philosophies, all in one place. And in many of these most significant trade cities, places like Kilwa or names are escaping me, Malacca, and places along the Malabar coast of India, what you're going to have are much more diverse cities, much more culturally tolerant cities than perhaps in places where you have trade that is much more localized. This will also enable the spread of ideas across the Indian Ocean, and that's going to become a major point today, especially when we think about the effects of the growth of Indian Ocean trade. It is that spread of ideas, religions, that really come to define the cultural interactions of the Indian Ocean. Again, I just want to remind you, if you have any questions as we go, if I'm saying anything that you want me to expand on, go ahead and type your question either directly in the chat, or you can put it in the Ask a Question section down at the bottom. And we'll be sure to try to answer all of your questions before we get done today. We got a good crowd in here. Again, if you are attending, don't be shy in the chat. Feel free to throw up where you're from, perhaps what you're learning right now in world history. Are we ahead of your class? Are we behind your class? Is this review for you or preview for you? We'd love to know it. Love to hear from you. So if we think about those unique features, those cosmopolitan cities, of course, this is a trade network. And that's what we're thinking about today is trade, trade, trade. So what exactly was traded in the Indian Ocean? Well, we want to think about trends for trade. Typically, what we see are in overland trade. Now, that would not apply to the Indian Ocean here, but in overland trade, you are dealing with difficult terrain, sometimes great limitations on how much you can carry from place to place. It becomes quite expensive to move goods from one place to another. And so in overland trade, we typically see only luxury goods traded. Those are those high value, low weight ratio goods. You know, you can carry like a small sack of spices, yet it's worth, a ton of money. You're going to do that. You're not going to be carrying, some pallet of cotton cloth that might not be worth very much. So overland trade, typically mostly luxury goods, high value, low weight ratios. But the trade across an ocean doesn't really have that same restriction. So what we end up seeing in maritime trade, whether it be in the Mediterranean or the Indian Ocean or off the coast of China, the South China Sea or East China Sea or Yellow Sea or whatever, later on in the Atlantic and the Pacific, we're going to see bulk items be traded. So in the Indian Ocean, that's one thing to consider. Bulk items, and what we mean by that are items like timber, ivory, bulk spices. Now, spices could be high value goods, and so they were not always traded just over land, but in very large quantities, they would have been traded, particularly in the maritime system. So we're talking about things like black pepper, cloves, saffron, and the list goes on and on. I used to have a big list that I would memorize, and I don't do that anymore. But black pepper is really the one that dominates this spice trade. So if we're thinking about bulk spices, cotton textiles, which I mentioned just a little bit ago, maybe not as luxurious as the fine silk fabrics from China. Cotton grown originally in South Asia, then cultivation spreads to Persia, Arabia, and other places. So those are some of these bulk items that typically get traded. But like every other trade route, it's not just going to be limited to a certain amount of items. There are still some luxury goods, many luxury goods that are traded in the Indian Ocean, particularly spices, which could be seen as a luxury good as well as a bulk good. Silk that from China makes its way into the Indian Ocean, of course. Porcelain makes its way into the Indian Ocean. Gold, of course, and your precious metals and rubies from certain islands around South Asia, and from South Asia itself. And so you have all of those things that are also traded. But the bulk items are going to be the big stuff. These luxury items are typically traded, of course, to wealthier peoples. They're carried from their homelands, but they may not be traded directly with the people at the final destination. So, for example, China might trade with people in Southeast Asia, and then people in Southeast Asia might trade with people in India, and then those goods might make it from India to Arabia, and those goods might make it from Arabia to the Swahili coast, and Swahili coast might trade ivory or gold or slaves or maybe even exotic animals, as they did at one time. And those might go directly to India, right? So there's, this trade you can see on this map even many of the routes that were traversed in this Indian Ocean. You can also see a lot of the major players in this trade. So those, the coast of East Africa, especially places like Mogadishu and Kilwa, in East Africa, the Arabian Peninsula trading, Persia, or what is nowadays Iran, of course, the coast of India, and we'll talk about this region of Southeast Asia, especially this little place where my mouse is hovering called Malacca. So those are some of the major players. Beyond that, it wasn't just limited to people who were in that Indian Ocean basin. We do know that China was a major player for a time with trade in the Indian Ocean. So keep that in mind as well. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. The Indian Ocean overall is the dominant trade network of the post-classical era. Even with all the trade that's going on the Silk Road and how important it is, especially when the Mongols come along, the Indian Ocean is going to be trading in the highest volume of goods. There's more people in the Indian Ocean trading. There's more volume. Of course, there's more interactions of different cultures because of this. Of course, yeah, if you got any questions, put them in the chat. Yeah, let's keep going. I see we have some chat in the chat. I like seeing that. Rep where you're from. Let us know where you're watching from. Let's see what areas we have represented across the country today, or maybe even beyond. Let's take a look here at another image that I wanted to share with you. If we think about trade in the Indian Ocean, and I said, this was a dominant trade network during the post-classical era, even from before this time period officially starts in the year 1200 or what have you, right? If we think about time period 0, everything before, trade was occurring in the Indian Ocean. It was described by the Greco-Egyptian merchant earlier that we saw. And this is actually a relief of a trading ship from a very important temple on the island of Java in Indonesia. We're actually going to look at it a little bit later. We're going to talk about Srivijaya later on in this presentation briefly. But this was included in this temple at Borobudur in around the year 800. And there's just this massive temple complex that includes lots of different carvings of things that were important to the people at the time. And this was a Buddhist temple. Of course, Buddhism, like other religions, spread along the Indian Ocean trade network. But this showing evidence of trade along the Indian Ocean. You can see relatively large ship and sails, a large crew on this ship sailing. And this isn't the only example. There's 4 or 5 or maybe even 6 different examples of carvings of trade that we find in this region. So thinking about that, we want to consider, well, all right, trade certainly was present around the year 800 CE in the region. Why does the Indian Ocean trade grow so much between, say, 600 CE and 1450? So yeah, let's spend some time thinking about that. We're going to look first at our causes, and we're going to focus on a few different things. One, technology, which plays a massive role in trade. 2, environmental knowledge, which we've already talked about a little bit. And 3, cultural stimuli. So when we think about the transportation technologies which really come to define the Indian Ocean, we have to think about the compass, the astrolabe. The compass, which comes from China, is kind of modified, eventually makes its way to Europe by the 15th century and is used by Europeans to navigate the Atlantic Ocean and eventually reach the Indian Ocean themselves. And this other tool known as the astrolabe. And the image you see here is one example of an astrolabe, though they could take many different forms. So there was one image I saw of an Arabian astrolabe that was spherical. And what the astrolabe did was charted the stars. So what it allowed merchants or sailors to do was to understand their latitude on Earth, not just the direction they were traveling. and it also allowed them to navigate by the stars at night. So the astrolabe is actually an interesting technology because it passes through so many different hands in its development. The initial developments are found in Greece, and it travels to the Arab world where it is used and improved upon in the Indian Ocean trade, allowing ships to be much more accurate in their travels. And certainly if you can set course correctly, it also makes trade much safer and faster. And so what we end up having is, of course, just the use of these technologies, which makes trade safer and faster. People are going to be more likely to engage in trade. And so you're going to get certainly more goods being traded. Another thing that we see is the creation of certain ship designs which are unique to the Indian Ocean. One of these ship designs, which comes about before this time period gets started, is the dhow ship, D-H-O-W. The dhow ship typically, and you see kind of a small dhow ship up on top in this image. This is a modern image of what we would consider to be a small dhow ship. They varied in size. It could be much larger, but it was a mobile ship that could carry a pretty good amount of goods, and it used a specific type of sail called the lateen sail, L-A-T-E-E-N. The lateen sail allowed it to tack against the wind, so it was a very versatile ship, and was included technologies from different regions of the Indian Ocean. So it's hard to say exactly where it developed initially, but it was very much popularized by Arab merchants. Another example of a ship that was popular in the Indian Ocean, you see here at the bottom, and it is the junk ship. The junk ship is one that would allow many more goods to be carried. And so what we start to see is, as trade picks up in the Indian Ocean, there is a response in building larger ships that can carry more goods and meet the demand of the trade that is generated. It's kind of like a positive feedback loop. People want to trade, they get a taste of some items, they want more, you build bigger ships to ship more goods come in, more people are there available, it creates more demand, so you need more ships. And so ship design was an important technology that develops. The Chinese were especially known for their junk ships that had these large bamboo sails mixed in with other sails and rudders that made, again, shipping faster, more efficient, and safer. The equivalent to new ship designs and technologies in the Indian Ocean, if you think about land trade, might be things like camel saddles or caravanserai along the Silk Roads, if you've been on any of our presentations about that. Of course, if you want to know a little bit more about Silk Road trade, you can sign up for the live stream about the Mongols that's coming up later this week. If you missed me announce that a little bit earlier, and you can click the call to action button right there at the bottom. So so those are things I would consider. I see some questions are popping up in the bottom. I'm definitely going to get to those, so hang with me and we'll make sure that we're answering those. And again, if anybody out there has some questions, go ahead and put them down below. Now, if we think about environmental knowledge, kind of beyond just technologies which help spur on trade, those knowledge of the monsoon winds certainly play a role. That knowledge was found very early in the understanding the currents of the monsoon winds and seasons really help people travel very quickly from place to place. Again, speeding up trade and making it much more predictable. Now, that environmental knowledge, of course, spreads from one place to another, and then people can set their trading schedule by these monsoon seasons. Beyond that, of course, there is cultural stimuli for trade, especially in this time period we're talking about right now. And the most significant of this is the spread of Islam. And Islam has a major factor, or is a major factor in the growth of trade in the Indian Ocean. Islam, of course, develops around the year 600 CE. So 610 is when Muhammad receives his first revelations. Muslim calendar starts in the year 622. We see the Umayyad, the Rashidun, Umayyad, and Abbasid caliphates grow quite large by the 1200s. But Islam spreads with those caliphates. So throughout North Africa, into the through trade and conquest through North Africa into Asia, throughout, of course, the Arabian Peninsula, and then beyond that, through maritime trade into the Indian Ocean, making its way to places in East Africa, especially. The Islam, being a religion founded by a merchant and trader, really held trade to in high esteem, and so it was encouraged. So we see that Muslim city-states develop on the Swahili coast. Of course, Arabia being the home of Islam. The Delhi Sultanate eventually takes hold in India, which was a Muslim empire in India. And Islam also spreads into Southeast Asia as far as Indonesia. Of course, today, Indonesia as a country, as a modern nation state, is the largest Muslim country in the world by population, by number of Muslims. So kind of interesting to see how Islam can spread, excuse me, from its home, its base in the Arabian Peninsula, all the way to Southeast Asia, and have such a large footing there. Now, just as we can trace the spread of Islam, we can also trace the spread of goods around the Indian Ocean. And this is one of my, I know it looks like a bunch of broken plates. That's probably what you're thinking about. But this is actually one of my favorite sources to use in AP World History. In fact, this is, if you want to know more about this, it's actually featured in a podcast I love, and a book that came out of the British Museum, and some work there of the 100 objects that what was it called? 100 objects that explain the world, something along those lines. And these are what they look like. They are broken pieces of pottery, pot shards. And these were found on the coast of East Africa in modern day Tanzania, where Kilwa, the important trading city of the Swahili coast, was located. They were found on the beach there in Tanzania. Now, here's the thing. These pots were not made in Tanzania. They actually come from as far away as the Middle East, and some of them come from as far away as China. Yet these pots, which date to sometime between the year 1000 and 1500, so consider 500 to 1000 years ago, these pot shards are together, but from all across the world. I mean, these pots, which are maybe 1,000 years old, are much better traveled than even I am. And they really highlight the extent of trade in the Indian Ocean. They likely were pots that were used by people in Kilwa and were thrown out by the inhabitants, eventually became junk or broken or what have you. But they are kind of this reminder that this was a major trading city at the time. Kilwa was an important trading post on the east coast of Africa. It was the access point to many different trade goods out of Africa, including ivory, gold, slaves, and it was an important place where wares could be brought as well from other places. You had to have something, of course, to trade. And the different glazes on this pottery, the different designs on this pottery indicates they were made in different places. For example, the blue-green colored pottery was made in China. And so that is, a style that is reminiscent of that. Other of these decorated pieces, the green decorated pieces, are typical of the Middle East, things that would have been made in Iran or on the Arabian Peninsula in what is now Oman. And some of the pieces that were found at this place were very likely made close to home. Some of these may have been transported to India. They may have been traded for things like elephant ivory or lumber or gold, and those things may have been brought back to places like the Middle East, India, Southeast Asia, China. So it's, you know, a really interesting source, although they're just broken pieces of pottery, right? But it's kind of interesting to see just how extensive the trade network was so long ago here in the Indian Ocean. All right, so that brings us, I know that's a lot of information. We're thinking about trade in the Indian Ocean, but what I want to do is a quick check for understanding. So you can put this in the chat. You can put your answers in the chat here, or, you know, think about this. You can choose more than one answer in these questions, so feel free to do so. So the first question we have here is, which of the following were major participants in the Indian Ocean trade prior to 1450? Again, you may choose more than one. Bonus points if you can spell something out of the letters, as long as it's appropriate. I don't know if you're going to be able to. That's just throwing that out there. I'll give you a minute to look through. All right, which were major participants? Swahili coast, China, Portuguese, Arabs, Mongols, South Asians. All right, let's take a look at what we have here and what our answers might be. So thinking about this again, pretty straightforward question here. You know, which of these are major participants? Correct answers here: A, B, D, and F. A, B, D, and F. So the Swahili coast, you just heard me talk a great deal about it. China, Arabs of the Middle East, particularly the Arabian Peninsula, and South Asians, those people from India, or modern day India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. So these were major participants. China, of course, had periods of major participation and then isolation. But in this time period, as we'll see in a little bit, they did have a great deal of participation. And certainly with the pottery we just looked at, they traded a good deal. All right, next question. Let's take a look at this one. Which of the following contributed to the expansion of trade in the Indian Ocean? Let's see who was paying attention here. Make sure that you're on the right idea. All right, which of these contributed to the expansion of trade? And again, feel free to put your answers in the chat. First one here will get a shout out from your illustrious streamer, Mr. Lassiter. We have Cynthia participating in the chat tonight. Good to see you, Cynthia. Harmeet in the chat tonight. Sunny in the chat tonight. Student guy coming in first. He says A and D, but Shreya definitely says a little bit more than that. She says A, B, C, and D, and Valerie agrees. Taylor agrees. Cynthia, you are special. Student guy, A to D, all of them. Sorry, I misunderstood your answer. Yeah, y'all are doing a nice job. You nailed it. So I guess if student guy, I had read your answer correctly, you would have been the one to get the shout out. A through D all are correct answers. E would be correct if we changed it from the spread of Christianity to, say, the spread of Islam, right? That was what we talked mostly about. Joshua, of course, you're special. Really great to have y'all in here. I will say this: I streamed last year for 5 of them. Feel free to throw your questions up there. This is a place for us to interact. Really want to have you participating in this. So Harmeet is very excited about all of this. So I'm pretty psyched too. So let's keep moving. So those are just a couple questions checking what we knew about the causes. Let's now move forward with the effects of the growth of trade. So the first thing I want to talk about is when we think about the growth of trade in the Indian Ocean is the growth of new states. And so this is one of our major effects of trade in the Indian Ocean. In fact, one of the key concepts of the framework literally says, and if we think about the trend of this, the Indian Ocean Trading Network fostered the growth of states, right? And that's no surprise. In places where you have a great deal of trade, you're going to have a much stronger economy and a much stronger state or power entity. And so some of these new states that we see develop are the city states along the Swahili coast. Some examples of those, we were talking about Kilwa. Oh gosh, I have a list of them somewhere, but now I'm drawing a blank. Got to go back to my map here. Do I have them labeled? I can't see. It's too small for my horrible eyes. Let me see if I can get this on my other screen here. Yeah, Kilwa, Mombasa, Mogadishu. I know I'm missing some of them, missing something, but I'm trying my best. But along the Swahili state, these independent trading city-states became very important for trade in this region. So just kind of keep that in mind. Malindi, that's the other one I was trying to think of. So along the east coast of Africa, this Swahili coast, again, these city-states grow because of trade and because they are access points to the interior of Africa, which has these great resources that are needed. In other places, we see the growth of states. For example, in India, we see this growth of several different states. One example that is given is the Gujarat region of Western India, the western coast of India. And the Gujarat region engaged in trade all over the Indian Ocean. They had traded the people of that region had been traders for thousands of years, quite literally. And in this time period, it certainly becomes a major region and source as trade expands in the Indian Ocean. Not only is it a good central point, if you look at a map and see where India is, right? It is, I'm going the wrong way with my map here. It is quite literally in the middle of the Indian Ocean, juts right out there, this peninsula into the Indian Ocean. So Gujarat was in a really good location for trade. It also had access to a lot of goods that people wanted to trade from the subcontinent of India. It's access to the Silk Roads, even goods that can be traded through there into the Indian Ocean. And for a time, Gujarat itself existed as its own kingdom, its own sultanate. Eventually, it was taken over by the Delhi Sultanate for a time. Before it becomes independent, it was taken over by the Delhi Sultanate for a while. From 1407 to 1573, it operates as an independent sultanate until Mughal forces come in and conquer it. So, this area was so valuable that we're going to have multiple groups kind of coming in and trying to take over and access the wealth of trade in that region. Beyond that, we have a really interesting case of a tiny strip of water, which you may have heard about in your classes, called the Strait of Malacca. Now, the Strait of Malacca is found in Southeast Asia. It is between the Malay Peninsula and the islands of Indonesia. And so what we see here in this strait is this very narrow strip of land through which all trade from the South China Sea and basically coming from East Asia or the islands of, let me see if I can pull up a good map here. This is a good one, even though it's kind of going ahead. Where trade from China, East Asia, the Philippines, the Molucca Islands, which involved a lot of spices, the spice islands out here, trade from Java. It would all pass through this narrow strait. Now, what early states realized was that by controlling that Strait of Malacca, you could, yeah, and Mr. Beck popping in with the spelling here. So yeah, that is a good note that you'll see it spelled multiple ways in AP World History. This is just the way I happen to spell it today. That if you could control trade through that region, you could actually create quite an important trading empire. And there were several examples of this. For example, from the 8th century, 8th or 9th century up until the 14th century, a kingdom known as Srivijaya thrived on the spice trade through the Straits of Malacca. They really didn't have a land-based empire, so to speak. They simply controlled some major trading coastal cities, and then they regulated what ships could pass through the straits. You know, if you aren't going to pay a tax to us or trade with us, well, then, you know, we'll go and attack your ships and make sure that we control what comes through here. Srivijaya, by the way, was very important for helping diffuse Buddhism across the region. We talked about that image earlier on in this presentation, and this is kind of the region where we find that. But later on, around the year 1400, comes a new state that develops as trade continues to expand and grow, and it is what we call the Sultanate of Malacca. Lasts from about 1400 to 1500. I think the date I saw was about 1511, and it came to dominate this bustling route. That trade route is going to be extremely important. Eventually, Europeans will fight battles to take it over, and make sure that they can control trade through that port. Yeah, so keep that in mind, that even in kind of a smaller area, just a increase in trade through that region could support a powerful trading state. Of course, another effect of the growth of this Indian Ocean trade was simply just increased productive capacity, is what we call this, meaning that more goods are being made in the Indian Ocean to be traded throughout the Indian Ocean, right? So as the demand for these goods comes about, we see more textiles being produced, cotton textiles being traded. We see ivory, greater amounts of ivory being exported from Africa, greater amounts of porcelain from China moving into the Indian Ocean as well. So those are just some examples of goods that were created or were in high demand. Of course, the production of spices as well will flood the Indian Ocean and will, of course, grow even more in our next time period when Europeans arrive and demand to control all of them. Those great Europeans. Anyways, beyond just the growth of states and the growth of demand in this Indian Ocean trade, we also see new cultural developments. One important cultural development to pick up on is the development of diasporic communities. Now, when we say this word diaspora, we basically mean all the people in a region all the people of a region that are spread kind of maybe beyond that region. So we think about the dispersion of any people from their original homeland. You might hear people talk about the Jewish diaspora, right, which includes all Jewish people anywhere in the world, or the African diaspora, which would include not just Africans, but African Americans or African Europeans or wherever Africans may be around the world. So we tend to think of this, again, people kind of outside of their original homeland. And as trade requires people to travel far away from their homeland, we see these merchant communities pop up all around the Indian Ocean. For example, Arab and Persian communities pop up in East Africa. Arabs and Persians being from the Arabian Peninsula and what is modern Iran were frequently trading in East Africa. And so it made sense for many people perhaps to stay and take up residence there and form a trade connection with with their kind of their homeland. And so that becomes kind of a unique feature of the Indian Ocean. We talked a little bit about that. So it's cosmopolitan cities that develop. Well, here's where we're seeing it. In Southeast Asia, we also see Chinese merchant communities developing. So kind of a Chinese diaspora with trade in those regions. That especially grows in the latter days of the Song dynasty, when they're feeling pressure from the north from the Mongols. And when the Mongols take over China, they're not so much interested in maritime trade as they are in overland trade and control of the Silk Roads and all the land that they own. And so these Chinese diasporic communities really establish themselves in Southeast Asia. And when the Mongols leave and the Ming dynasty takes over, there are connections to be made by the Ming voyages. And then, of course, Malay communities across the Indian Ocean basin. People from the Malay Peninsula who spread throughout the Indian Ocean basin for trade, even though just off of this map, some finding homes in Madagascar. And of course, that happened over long periods of time. All right, so that brings us to another quick check for understanding, as we've kind of looked at just a little bit more briefly, the effects of trade in the Indian Ocean. So here's the first question. Which region consisted of city-states linked to the Indian Ocean trade on the east coast of Africa? By this point, this should be out of a holster, so go ahead and put your answer in. First one gets a shout out. First one to get it correct. Taylor's our first one to get it correct. Joshua, right out of holster. Thanks for piping in, and already sees the error. But I had a feeling that somebody was going to do that because it was the first one, and we had just gotten done talking about Malacca. So actually, I kind of did exactly what I hoped. So east coast of Africa, we're talking about the Swahili coast. We're talking about the Swahili coast here. Malacca, again, is in Southeast Asia, Gujarat in South Asia or modern India, the Arabian Peninsula, the Middle East. The Malabar coast is along the coast of India, the southeast coast of India. All right, next question. Which of the following groups of people formed diasporic communities through trade in the Indian Ocean prior to 1450? All right, what do we have here? All right, you can choose more than one answer, so make sure that you get all of your answers in. All right, and I think we got Shreya with the first correct answer here. A, D, and I keep trying to change it, but I'm on the wrong screen. A, B, and D is the correct answer. Those Arab merchants, of course, remember the connection with Arab merchants, the spread of Islam, the importance of that cultural spread, right? So those are very much linked together. Chinese and Malay merchants as well. European merchants will come into the Indian Ocean in 1498 and be there kind of after, although they do not, well, in some cases, but for the most part are not forming permanent communities there, at least for some time. All right, now this is a throwback question. So let me give you an idea. This is a question that we have not yet covered. Actually, I may have mentioned it briefly. Which of the following travelers sailed with his treasure fleet into the Indian Ocean for the Ming dynasty of China? Let's see who was paying attention, or maybe who attended 2 weeks ago. I think it was 2 weeks ago, my live stream on medieval China. I really enjoyed putting that one together. If you want access to any of our old live streams, that might help you get this, although y'all are doing a great job with this question. Simply, join up, join us, our Fiveable community, get access to those old live streams. You can go back to them anytime you want. Definitely helpful when you get to your unit tests. Certainly helpful to go back to when you get to your midterm exams, and of course when we get to the big AP exam. Right here, we're thinking about the treasure fleet of the Ming Dynasty. Zheng He here is who we're talking about. And again, previous stream, go back and find the stream we did on medieval China. I think it was called something like China in the medieval period, something along those lines, I believe. The China in the global Middle Ages. That's what we called it. So definitely go back and take a look at that. In that video, we looked at everything from the ancient China, kind of going through what happened ways back, but we also looked at the Song Empire, the Yuan dynasty, and the Ming dynasty. Those are the big focuses of our presentation. Of course, the Yuan are the Mongols, so can't give you a better pitch than that. All right, last little thing with the growth of trade, or last couple things with the effects of the growth of Indian Ocean trade. As I mentioned, technological and cultural transfers are really, really important. Some examples of this we see are the voyages of Zheng He, which occur during the Ming dynasty that we just mentioned in China. Zheng He, and you can see his voyages here, made connections between China and places all across the Indian Ocean. He went to Southeast Asia and India and the Arabian Peninsula and to the coast of East Africa. Of course, transferring or making connections between China and these trading regions. He was especially known for his large treasure fleets, these massive amounts of ships, and the lavish gifts that he would bring. And he also brought back a giraffe for the emperor. So that's kind of cool. So, of course, those cultural transfers were very important for spurring on trade, especially as people continue to want access to some of those markets in China, especially for silk, but also porcelain, which was growing in popularity at this time. We also see the cultural transfer that really occurs across this time period of the spread of Hinduism and Buddhism into Southeast Asia. The spread of those religions into Southeast Asia occur over a long period of time. So it's not just something that occurs between 1200 and 1450. Hinduism had been spreading into Southeast Asia for some time through the Indian Ocean trade, and Buddhism does as well. I mentioned earlier Srivijaya and its role with Buddhism. Srivijaya was basically an Indonesian city-state based on the island of Sumatra, which is in present-day Indonesia, and it had influence over a lot of Southeast Asia because of its location and its central location for trade, especially through Southeast Asia. But for the spread of Buddhism, it was very important because Srivijaya really promoted Buddhism, building this temple here, which I talked about earlier, Borobudur. Apologize for my poor pronunciation of that. Hopefully, maybe somebody can put the actual pronunciation in the chat. That would be helpful. But Borobudur is the temple where that first image that we saw of that ship came from, actually. And so the spread of Buddhism to this region via trade, and then also from this region to the surrounding areas, was certainly a feature of the kind of cultural transfer that was found in the Indian Ocean. Same way that Islam spread, as we talked about earlier. We also see we have a lot of information on these cultural transfers and cultural interactions because of some records of travelers, actually. Two important travelers from this time period, although there are more, are Ibn Battuta and Marco Polo. Now, Marco Polo, of course, was known for going out to China and interacting with the Mongols, but in some of his voyages, he did travel a little bit into the Indian Ocean and writes a little bit about that. Ibn Battuta, though, is one that we're going to spend a little bit more time on here in a couple minutes and think about for his description of trade in the Indian Ocean. But beyond that, technological cultural transfers, and then here is more of an environmental or an agricultural transfer, and that is the spread of bananas, which is something I think students always get a kick out of. Bananas spread throughout the Indian Ocean basin through trade. So they develop in Southeast Asia, spread to South Asia, and eventually to Africa, and become a major staple of the diet of people in Africa. So that's kind of something really important to consider too, that we're not just looking at the spread of technology, culture, goods, but also maybe some environmental things. The same way that once the Columbian Exchange happens, goods will move in the other direction. So last thing before I basically just answer questions to the end, I just want to look. I have two sources here. We'll only actually spend time with one of them. I'll make sure to link this presentation in the replay information. If you want access to it, you can take a look at the second source. But I was talking about this guy, Ibn Battuta, as an interregional traveler who interacted with many different peoples of across the Indian Ocean, especially Muslim communities across the Indian Ocean. Interregional traveler, actually from Northwest Africa, like pretty much from Morocco. He was born in present-day Morocco in 1304. When he was about 22 years old, he set off on his Hajj to Mecca, his pilgrimage to Mecca. And of course, Mecca in the Arabian Peninsula, of course, some travel in the Indian Ocean was for this purpose from all the kind of disparate, different Islamic diasporic communities around the Indian Ocean. And the idea was, all right, go to Mecca, go on this pilgrimage. But his journeys kept him going further. He was very educated scholar, Muslim scholar. And so he began traveling place to place. 7 years after he leaves, he goes out to India. He ends up in Delhi. He has an entourage of about 40 companions, crates of luxury items to give as gifts. His total travels last about 24 years. He travels somewhere in the neighborhood of 75,000 miles. And luckily for us, he left a record of his travels. And I have two sources here. We're just going to look. There's really two of them. One talks about Chinese ships, and the other about trade practices in East Africa. And so let's talk about those trade practices. He says, we sailed for 15 nights from the Horn of Africa and came to Mogadishu, which is a town of enormous size. Remember, these are trading cities in East Africa where a great deal of trade is being done. So this is an impressive city to him. And a guy from Morocco, from the Mediterranean coast, that's pretty important. It's the custom of the people of this town that when a vessel reaches the anchorage, the sumbuks, which were small boats, come out to it. And each sumbuk, there are a number of young men in the town, each one of them who brings a covered platter containing food and presents it to one of the merchants on the ship saying, "This is my guest." And each of the others does the same. So with this trade, there is, of course, customs, trading customs that exist in these communities because it is so common. The merchant on disembarking goes only to the house of his host among the young men, except those of them who have made frequent journeys to the town and have gained some acquaintance with its inhabitants. So again, here are people making return trips, right? So there are first timers who are now becoming hosted by new people, people who want to get into this trade. And then these people who continue to come back and trade in this region and have hosts for their long stays. When he takes up residence with the host, the latter sells his goods for and buys for him. And if anyone buys anything from him at too low a price or sells to him in the absence of his host, that sale is held invalid by them. This practice is only profitable for one of them. So a little bit of commentary on the trade practice there. But definitely want to highlight the importance of Africa in this Indian Ocean trade. Something I didn't mention, in the Swahili coast, and we really probably don't have time today for is thinking about even like words in the Swahili language and how they are reliant on trade. The words in Swahili language come from not just native African languages, but are heavily influenced by Arabic. Of course, that trade between Arabia and the Swahili coast and the influence of Islam, but are also in some cases influenced by words from South Asia, East Asia even, and Southeast Asia. And so you get some really unique examples of Swahili words that have a number of of etymologies, or the etymology includes a number of roots or backgrounds. And if I had it up, I don't have it at my fingertips right now, I would go through some of those words with you, but I'm sorry, I don't. Anyways, so that brings us basically to a stopping point here, thinking about the causes and effects of the growth of exchange in the Indian Ocean. However, certainly you have some questions. So if you want to put them in the chat or put them down in the question thing, I'll be happy to answer them. As long as I have questions to answer, I'll be here for a little bit longer. The first question that is here is a first-time teacher of AP World. Well, welcome to our wonderful community. I was wondering if you can recommend a site for practice SAQ, LEQ, DBQ. There's not a lot of released material to build off of. Well, there's a great number of sites. I don't want to recommend one over another. Of course, Fiveable, we in our presentations will do practice SAQs, LEQs, and DBQs, and that will pick up more and more throughout the year. If you take a look back at one of my recent presentations, I think it was one that I did on, it might have been hunter-gatherers or the Neolithic Revolution. We looked at a practice SAQ, short answer question. So those will definitely be coming up here on Fiveable. If you are approved by the AP or the College Board, I know there's the new AP classroom materials that you can use. Beyond that, just do a quick search. Most of them will pop up. In terms of for students and teachers, review books, there's a lot of them out there. Go to your local bookstore, buy local, and you can find some really good resources out there. Most of them will have the same basic information in them. The questions are not going to be as high quality as maybe what your teachers are writing or on a weekly basis, or what you'll get from from practice tests from the College Board, but they are good for practicing your knowledge and skills and using primary sources to answer questions, especially for multiple choice. If you do get a book or a review book, make sure that you get one that also gives you some sample essays so that you can read and kind of compare your writing to. That would be my advice. And then also stay in touch with these presentations, and definitely participate in any of them that deal with writing. All right, I got a 1 on my last SAQ. Any suggestions, tips, or tricks for doing better? Student guy. That's not the end of the world getting a 1, especially at this point in the year. You got a lot of time to improve. Now, when I've graded for the AP exam, I've always been on either the LEQ or DBQ. So I haven't graded the SAQ, but I know it well. And I would say in terms of advice or tips or tricks, there really aren't any tricks except reading the question carefully and doing what it asks. Some questions or some parts of the SAQ ask you only to identify, right? Just identify something, and it might be from a source, it might be from a chart, it might be from your head, and then you're just literally saying, all right, this is something that happened in history that applies to this question, and that's really all you have to say. But what usually gets students on the SAQ is the questions that say explain, or explain how, or explain a difference, or explain a similarity, or describe. Then you have to do a little bit more. And when it asks you to explain, I typically tell students, like many other teachers do, to ace it. Answer the question, right? Straightforward. What is a similarity or difference, if that's what it's asking you about, or what is a counter argument, or what is an example? Cite your evidence. Come up with a piece of specific historical evidence. You can't just, on these SAQs, just have some random trend. You're going to have to know some specific examples. So if the question is about diasporic communities in the Indian Ocean, you can't just say, there were many diasporic communities. You need to give an example. For example, Chinese communities or Arab merchant communities spread throughout the Indian Ocean. And then you're going to want to explain why or how that's the case, or how that represents your answer. Why were there Arab merchant communities around the Indian Ocean? Why were there Chinese diasporic communities around the Indian Ocean? You would want to connect that to trade, perhaps even monsoon winds and these cosmopolitan cities. But that explanation has to come with it. But really pay attention to not only what the question's asking, but what verb the question has in it. Are you explaining? Are you identifying? That is something that really trips students up a good deal, and something that we'll definitely be practicing on Fiveable in the future. A lot of questions there about SAQs, LAQs. So I think on my next stream, I'll make sure to maybe spend a little bit of time knocking out perhaps an SAQ, or just outlining an LEQ with the topic that we're dealing with. Some of the streams I've done in the past have taken an LEQ topic, and we've kind of thought about it. This presentation, even off the top of my head, what are the causes and effects of Indian Ocean, the expansion of Indian Ocean trade? How would you go about answering that question based on this presentation? Something to chew on, something to think about. I think we've gotten through just those. There were just 2 questions there in the chat, so I think we're pretty good. And yeah, so that brings us to an end. I went 10 minutes over. Sorry, or you're welcome, whichever you prefer. I really enjoyed talking about Indian Ocean exchange networks today. It is one of my favorite topics. For some reason, I'm a nerd when it comes to trade networks. That's just my jam. I was not talking about the Silk Road today and giving you my million camel facts and camel saddle facts and the like, but I really enjoyed kind of taking a look at what we had to offer here. I hope you have a very good night. Get some rest. Don't forget that we have reviews throughout the week. So make sure that you go back and you see what we have to offer this week, right? And I'll throw that up there one more time for you. Tonight, 11:30 p.m. Eastern. But again, if you're in Central or Pacific time, maybe you can check in with Sailing the Oceans with Allie on the 4th, textbook reading and notes, the Mongols on the 5th, right? And then you can wrap it all up with that live student study group at the end of the week. Y'all have a great day. I'm going to go get some dinner. Y'all have a great night.